Hey there, it's Dan and you're watching the Salty Sea. Today I'm here to count down the best units in Warcry, moving on from the featherweights and getting into the middle of the pack. I've kind of fallen in love with this misfit category while doing the research for this vid, so I hope you like this list as much as I do. So let's start with going over the rules. Now, for the purposes of this video, a middleweight is going to mean anything between 80 and 180 points, and since Warcry has always fought in the 8 points, we're going to do a top 8. So let's get into how I evaluate them. The first thing I do is I think about, what's the role of a midsize unit? To me, a good midsize unit is something you want to run 2 or 3 of, knowing it won't be the backbone of your warband or even your heaviest hitter, but expecting it to do some serious work. It can either pose as a threat that isn't the leader, but punishes them for focusing on your leader, or maybe expands your power to other deployment zones. Or it can be something that's meant to add some punch to a chaff wall. Really anything in between, too. This point range has more units in it than the other two combined, yet most units between 80 and 180 points are pretty terrible. Chaff is king in this game, and the cookie cutter structure for an excellent warband is 2 massive heavies surrounded by a mobile chaff wall. So each of the units I'm going to list in this video gives its faction a legit reason to ignore that conventional wisdom, which I think is really exciting. Lastly, I do want to just talk to you a little bit about the stat formulas I use to show you some digestible numbers on each of the units. One is damage efficiency, which just provides a number to describe how well they deal damage to a wide range of toughnesses for their points. And the other is tank score, which does the same thing, but in describing how durable they are. I'm looking forward to deep diving these ratings once the GA books come out. I'll likely do a whole video on how to evaluate units, but until then, these are just simple numbers intended to make it easy to digest how well a unit fights. So let's get into the honorable mentions. I wanted to put down one unit at each end of the spectrum for the HMs. So let's start with the Arcanaut with Skyhook. This one's really amazing because for just 80 points, you get huge damage at range 2, which the benefit of range 2 increases exponentially for high damage units where your opponent can't easily just ignore them. They really do need to take them out. And while the 12 HP on the Arcanauts don't make it quite a tank unit, it does give it high enough durability, especially for something that fighty already. The only thing bringing this unit down is the move 3. Though, by the way, KO might get an honorable mention in every list, which should probably be taken as an indication that there's really a lot of options when you're building them. It's easy to build a KO list that, sure, it might fall on its face due to low movement for its chaff in some missions, but would completely dominate in other missions. Then on the high end of the spectrum, we've got the Kurnoth Hunter with Sword. It does an awesome elite unit impression for less than anything else that plays its role. It's got excellent tankiness and then the ability to sometimes one-shot chaff units, which the double ability that Kurnoths have really helps there too. So just for the price of 180, you can just get a giant tank that, sure, it can't move very fast, but rocks up the board and puts fear into the heart of your opponents. The only issue is it can't make this top 8 if it's not even the best Kurnoth Hunter, given that the Scythe one is a little better. So to actually get into the list, let's talk about the Drillmaster. Man, I will be honest, I really wanted the Drillmaster to make the list. It was the first unit I put down when I was shortlisting here, and then it kept falling down the list, almost getting pushed off as I considered the sort of 100+ options that are in this category. But it is a good unit. It's got move 5, legit damage in melee, okay durability, a nice ranged attack, a quad ability. It's got everything, which makes it an excellent unit for teaching you the game. I'm really glad they put it in the starter set. A couple keys with this one is, one, just think of the ranged attack as a bonus. The main damage that it does is actually in your face, so the ranged attack is just kind of some added flexibility that you've got. The same is true with the quad, actually. It's terrible in a lot of the other warbands that have this squad because it's usually on a big leader, often one that doesn't move very fast, and that's relying on it to be good. When it's on a big leader, it's actually pretty easy for your opponent to play around. They can just not swarm whoever has it. But here, it's on a unit that you could pretty easily use 2 of in your list, and it also has move 5. So it's much harder for your opponent to play around the possibility of it. You'll still usually use Rampage, but it's great to have in your back pocket. Iron Golems, being the starter set warband that struggles competitively, makes them really lovable to me, and I know they have a lot of fans in the community. And they really aren't garbage. The Drillmaster is a legitimately good unit, and getting the AOS box or getting an additional box with your starter set lets you run multiples, which can make the warband pretty playable. If only the other golems were as good as the Drillmaster is. So on to number 7, which is Namarti Thralls. I'm cheating a little bit here. This one defies my midsize definition a little bit by legitimately being the cheapest option in faction and something you probably will spam much more than 2 or 3 of. But it's still in the points range, and so here we go. It's got huge damage, functionally the same as that Arcanaut company, but instead of having the 12 hit points, it trades that in for some mobility and an amazing ability with High Tide. Now, I know that's not specific to the Thralls, but they are the backbone of how the ability works, so I think it does apply to them. They get +1 attack and +1 strength out of it, which gives them a huge boost because they have this 2-4 damage profile and only strength 3. So the ability giving them a whole bunch of non-crit damages, or hits that do actually do legitimate damage, just makes the sort of Onslaught Plus be extra valuable for them. Now, sure, multiple onslaughts equals good is pretty duh, but it really affects the entire warband and makes Idoneth Deepkin pretty good just for how you play to maximize that triple in round 3. Now, Thralls do have a bit of a glass cannon issue as far as lasting that long in the fight. So it's really important to tag team them with some defensive eels and using low tide in round 1 to keep everyone safe. So with low tide, you're going to want to use your wild dice to get multiple doubles early on in the game, and then use that to really dictate positioning to your opponent. Your eels can rush out and engage the scariest units from your opponent and pretty much survive a decent way into the rounds, which lets you set up the massive high tide later on. That said, the fragility is one of the things keeping them from being higher on the list, though there is an alternate version of the list where just all of the quality 80 points units are basically our top 5, but who wants that? Instead, we get to reserve some space for all the animals of the Mortal Realms, which I do legitimately think are great. So the next 3 slots are actually all going to be for the pets of the 8 points, starting with the good doggos. Gryph Hounds are great. They're just the perfect all-around unit to complement what the rest of your warband in Stormcast is doing. They've got solid damage and solid durability, all in this nice sort of quick moving package, which is not to mention even just their excellent ability. Their darting attack ability lets you move onto a unit, attack twice, and then if it didn't die, you can just disengage towards the objective or whatever space is important, which lets you kind of sort of pinball around the board while putting on damage. You could say, attack something to finish it off, move on to another unit, attack it, and then run away. Or you could have just finished off 2 separate units. Another option is that you can, if you're locked in combat already, you can just attack a super heavy unit 3 times, then run away, which is really nice for preserving your Gryph Hounds for later. The free disengage is also just amazing versus elite monster units. Being able to put massive damage on them without giving them a double attack to retaliate is just wonderful. those big units, say like a Korgorath, just love getting into combat early on and then just being in combat already the whole game and just being able to double attack and explode something new every turn. So if you can rob them of that, that can be really hamstringing for your opponents. So being able to couple mobility with really respectable durability for objective play and then also having the ability to burst damage when you need it makes Gryph Hounds just an excellent inclusion for this list. And then from the good doggos on to the bad doggos, we've got Flesh Hounds out of Demons of Khorne. Just like the Gryph Hound, this has respectable fighting ability coupled with excellent mobility. In this case, it does cost a little more for the same attack profiles and defense profiles, but you do get 2 extra points of movement for that, your 20 points, and an even more incredible ability. It's hard to understate how good Hungry for Flesh is, especially given that it's not that flashy, at least not right away, but there are just dozens of different uses for it for the whole bonus move. You can say move, then use Hungry for Flesh to potentially move 24 inches across the board. Or you can say move, use Hungry for Flesh, and then attack something that's 14 inches, and sometimes if the board comes out right, even 16 inches away from you, which just gives Flesh Hounds this incredible threat range, meaning your opponent is just never safe anywhere on the board. Also, attacking something, then using Hungry for Flesh, and then attacking something else potentially lets you kill 2 chaff units in one activation, which is also excellent for a double. And it makes it easier to do than what you have from the Gryph Hound one. Also, doing Hungry for Flesh to move right away and then double attacking something lets you pour damage onto a unit that isn't even fighting you, and your opponent might not have even been thinking about how that was possible. Also, just note that while Hungry for Flesh requires a unit within 6 inches of you, the Flesh Hound can move 8 inches, so there's nothing saying that you can't just run towards something that wasn't even the unit that you targeted with the ability. As long as you're closer to it than you were before, you can actually just use your whole 8-inch move to run past it and attack something else or get onto an objective, take a treasure, something like that. Which is why this ability is just amazing because it just wins missions. Hunter-killer missions or treasure missions, you can have a Flesh Hound onto your target unit from places where your opponent just couldn't imagine it happening before. And then any objective, your Flesh Hounds, their ability might not be sort of targeted for getting onto the objective first, but it is perfect for winning the fight once you get there, since you'll almost always get to the objective with an attack activation left. So why isn't it number 1 out of the animals of the 8 points? Well, it is a little expensive for what it does, and the doggos are just barely outclassed by the kitties of the mortal realm, the combo cat of the Rocktusk Prowler. Now, it's hard to talk about this without also talking about the Beastmaster, which is admittedly a little bit more disappointing for its points. But also Games Workshop just gets bonus points here for including a Johnny combo in the starter set, which I really respect. The cat has excellent damage abilities, as well as that awesome mobility of going 8 inches. Then it's got not just 1 excellent ability, but 3 very solid ones. All of the abilities for Untamed Beasts are more than relevant here for the Prowler. Pounce is the basic charge ability that a ton of units in the game have, and it's blah for most of them, but Rocktusk Prowlers use it better than most. One being that they're fast, so being able to put that sort of average of 3.5 damage onto anything, even from pretty far away, is very nice. But also because of how much damage they usually do, Pounce often pushes their damage up above 10, which is really nice for one-shotting, mid-sized models. Then Savage Fury, meaning a 9-inch move. 9 only being one more than 8 seems like it would be less, but it really does, especially with how some of the boards are set up to be 9 inches away from each other. It really does have a lot of value as far as moving across most of the board and then getting half an onslaught out of your Prowler. And then the Beastmaster ability is sort of the flagship here, and it can be used sneakily. So yes, there is the big sort of the jumping out at you obvious one of running in, attacking with the Prowler, and then on your next activation running in with your Beastmaster and giving your Prowler a bonus attack. But you can be kind of sneaky with it too, especially in later rounds. For example, let's say later in the game they lock up your cat in combat. You can sort of attack with your Beastmaster and then give a bonus attack with your Prowler to finish off whatever was locked up in combat. And then just sit with your Prowler for a while in that round, and then use it late to move really far and attack something completely out of the fight later in the round, which is really nice. The 180 points of it does make it hard to run more than 2 of them, but it is a bit of an exception on this list as well, where the Prowler is actually going to be the heart of your offense in an Untamed Beast warband. So, running 2 of them is going to be all that you need there, which is really nice. Now, moving on from the pets, we're going to get into the top 3. And the first one of those is going to be the Venomblood, specifically the one with Dueling Blades, since there are a few options in Splintered Fang. And everything positive that I said about our number 7, the Namarti Thralls, is true here as well. So Venombloods can just zip around the board, doing the kind of damage that units twice their price do. Now, what makes these better than Thralls if Thralls only got to number 7? It's really the trade-off of getting 2 HP for only 5 points. Now, normally I value durability much lower than other traits when I'm looking at models, but here 8 is really the magic number in Warcry. I'll explain more when I count down the top heavyweights, but there are a ton of units in this game that can deal 8 damage in one swing to a toughness 3 unit. 10 is often the difference between getting one-shotted and surviving to be able to attack back, and Venombloods attack back really hard. Plus, you can think about how these are deployed in a Splintered Fang warband, and they're sort of the epitome of what a mid-sized unit is meant to do. Splintered Fang are often trying to just pull off dirty tricks with their serpents, which are their sort of cheap chaff unit, and if your opponent focuses too much on disrupting the serpent plan, these Venombloods really are scary enough and cheap enough to majorly punish them. Having 4 each of Venombloods and serpents is an awesome start to an extremely scary Splintered Fang warband. These are also the best of a sort of subgroup in this video that are the aggressively costed sort of elite chaff group, which play a little differently than some of the other mid-sized units, since they all serve the purpose of chaff models, but coming with a major side of fries. So these Namarti Thralls, Arcanaut Skyhooks, Graveguard, and Sneaky Snufflers sort of make up that group of really aggressively costed, really powerful models in that 80-point range. And those easily could have been the top 5 of this list if I were more of a boring butt. But instead we're exciting butts here, which means that our number 2 has to come from Slaanesh. So is my bias showing with this pick? Maybe. Fiends are one of my favorite units. So let me count the ways and see if I can convince you too. Now, first of all, one notable thing is they're the only defensive unit that made this list, and they are by far the best at defense in this whole weight class. And they're also, they're a rare type of unit in that they're a mobile anvil, which is incredibly valuable. They can sort of rush out and engage the most important unit out of your opponents and not fear being blown up right away. And their ability really helps this as well. It lets you pick an enemy fighter within 1 inch, so something in combat with the Fiend, And you get to roll, and on a 2-up, until the end of the battle round, that fighter just can't move, can't disengage. They have to be fighting your Fiend. And then the incredible 8-inch mobility on the Fiend lets you, right at the beginning of a battle round, run up to the opponent's most important unit and tell it that it's going to be fighting this Fiend for a while. It also lets you sort of chase down a target unit in treasure missions and hold it in place so that your demonettes can come slice it up. That's really valuable, especially because Slaanesh, most of their offense comes out of massing as many demonettes as possible. So your opponent's most important units, they want to just be shredding those demonettes to cut out your offense, and the Fiends stop them from doing that. They also sort of have this awesome base size. Now, in AOS, base sizes are really important, but you want them to be small. And people talk all the time about how big bases are such a terrible thing in that game, and sometimes they bring that bias over to Warcry when they shouldn't. Warcry is a different game and requires different thinking here. Big bases are a mild inconvenience on offensive units, but on defensive ones, they're actually a huge plus. Your Fiends can zone out choke points because they're so big, and just cut off entire sections of the map for non-flying opponents. Plus, the speed with the size in combination gives you this flexibility, especially with how much longer the base is than it is wide, to sort of run up and Tokyo drift this thing into combat, letting you, at the very start of a round, tie up multiple units, sometimes an entire deployment group in combat with a single Fiend, which essentially just takes them out of the game, sometimes for 2 rounds, as they spend their first round disengaging and then spend their second round trying to get into the more important fight. That's just a really powerful thing to be able to do for only 150 points, often tying up, say, 300, 400 points of your opponents. And the fact that this disruption ability comes off on a 2-up instead of a 3 is really relevant here because while that's only just 1 notch on the dice, it actually slashes your fail rate in half, making it extremely reliable to be able to do it. It's 5 out of 6 chance, which is excellent. And that reliability also puts pressure on your opponent then to use their wild dice to try to always go first, so that your Fiends can't just take out their most important unit from the fight right away. And that kind of wild dice disparity will actually add up for you over the course of a game. Now, with all that, telling you how much I love Fiends, what could stop me from putting them at number 1, right? Well, what we've got next is a unit that I almost never hear people praising in various Warcry communities, so I want to heap some love on it here and see if I can convince you that it really is the best mid-sized unit in the game. And that's the Mirrorblade, coming out of Cypher Lords, and specifically the one with 2 swords. So, to back up a little bit here, chaff is king in Warcry. The most powerful thing in Warcry is just floods of undercosted cheap units with usually toughness 3 and 8 hit points. And so if level 1 in the game is board flood, level 2 then immediately becomes being able to clear the flood efficiently. And that's where we enter the Mirrorblade. At 115 points, it is by far the cheapest unit in the game that can reasonably expect to kill a chaff unit in 1 swing. So that alone would be enough to get it somewhere onto the list. But, well, that being because it does the most important action in the entire game and costing you fewer resources than any other unit to do so. But the bonuses keep coming with this thing. First, it's got mobility, which is huge, and not just when running across the map to clear chaff, because to give it this incredible attack profile for its points, they did have to make it a little bit fragile, sort of having the toughness and hit point profile of a chaff unit despite costing over 100 points. But the mobility lets you protect it pretty well, and lets you also choose your fights. But the movement of 5 is only half the mobility thing here, because this can teleport straight into combat. Mirrorblades have the minion rune mark, which lets your leader out of Cypher Lords, and even the second in command, just teleport these from 12 inches away to any place you want them, which can be right into combat. So that means that no enemy unit is safe after they activate, which puts a ton of pressure on your opponents. Because as soon as your opponent commits their heavy, your leader can teleport a Mirrorblade right onto them, where they average 13 points in 2 attacks to a toughness 4 unit. It can be absolutely devastating to watch your leader's health just get cut in half at the end of round 1 when you thought you were doing something totally innocuous with them. And that ability to put fear into your opponents is excellent because it means that the Mirrorblades are not just efficient at clearing chaff, but also an incredibly dangerous thing for elites. And so there is no opponent that's really safe from being able to convince themselves that the Mirrorblades aren't a threat. And also that balance just makes them, in my opinion, one of the most underrated units in this entire game. Well, underrated until I just put them number 1 on my list. So there you have it, the top 8 mid-sized units in Warcry, with the championship belt going to Cypher Lords. Listen, if you've made it this far in the video, please do consider hitting that like button, and if you haven't already, subscribing. We can call those your offering to Algorithmo, the Chaos Lord of YouTube. I'm going to be back with more Warcry videos in the future, especially the heavyweight division to round out this video series. So until then, may all your rolls be crits.